Hello and welcome to Business News Wales. I'm John Jackson, the Built Environment Editor, and in this discussion, we'll be talking about the new built environment. As you can imagine, this year has been full of surprises and our lives have changed dramatically in part because of COVID-19, but it's also put into focus other issues such as the continuing housing crisis, our continued concern for the climate, and at the moment, our real and genuine sort of worries for our business community. This interest is, however, turning into action, and there is increasing momentum to bring about the changes that will ultimately see us develop what will be a very new built environment. So to discuss this, it's my great pleasure to be welcoming Sophie Howe, who is the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. And hello, Sophie. Thank you so much for joining us. What I'd like to do, though, is just before we start, you have a very big job title, and I thought you might like the quick opportunity to explain what the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales entails.
Absolutely, it's something that I have to explain quite often, possibly because I'm the only Future Generations Commissioner in the world, so therefore it does take some explaining. So my job has a number of facets to it. So essentially, as set out in law, my job is to act as the guardian of the interests of the future generations of Wales. What does that mean in practice? That means that I have a role in advising and supporting 44 public bodies who are covered by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act on how they meet the aspirations of that act, which is really all about how do we improve the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales, and how do we take decisions in a way which meets today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And as well as advising those 44 public bodies, I also have to monitor and assess the progress they're making towards us getting to what's set out in the law, which is 7 national wellbeing goals for the future of Wales.
Brilliant. I can tell you've said that before. You know, I don't want to labour it, but we are coming towards the end of what has been the most exceptional of years. And I think we can expect 2021 will have further challenges to look at. So from your own perspective, has this influenced your thoughts about the future? And have you learned positive lessons from the pandemic?
Well, without doubt, it's been a hugely challenging year for all manner of reasons. You know, people who've lost their loved ones, people, we've all been in lockdown and the effect that that's had on mental health, a huge economic impact, which is, just ongoing and is likely to be ongoing for some time to come. But I think there are, amongst all that angst, there are reasons to be cheerful or reasons to be positive about the future. Obviously, we've got a vaccine on the way, but also I think it's given an opportunity for people to pause and reflect on perhaps their lives as individuals, but also, how they want society to look. So during the lockdown, we heard lots of stories of people reconnecting with nature. We know from the evidence that, carbon emissions were drastically down, air pollution levels drastically down, people commenting that, they were hearing the birds sing for, the first time in a long time and were, liking the fact that there was less traffic on the road. And so I suppose that's from a personal perspective, but I also think it's given the government a bit of a wake-up call and an opportunity. They say never waste a good crisis, but an opportunity to think about doing different things. So some of the things that I've been talking about for quite a while, so I'm sure many of your listeners will have a particular view on the M4 Relief Road, for example. Some of the things that I was talking about there was this shift towards home working, and actually if we went towards home working at a faster pace, invested in the digital infrastructure to allow people to do that, actually would we need a road at all? And I think people sort of felt, well, yes, okay, we can sort of see it's come in, but it's kind of years and years away. Well, in the space of like 8 weeks, we probably did made progress towards that home working, which would have previously taken maybe about 8 years or so. So I think there are lots of things that have been fast forwarded during this pandemic, and things which perhaps weren't possible or weren't on the agenda before, things like a universal basic income, which, okay, it's not universal. We know that there are people slipping through the net, but never before have we seen the sort of investment, to backfill people's salaries through this furlough scheme. And does that pave the way for a universal basic income, which, was really seen as a kind of, left of field idea before the pandemic struck? So I think that there are a number of opportunities. I'm pleased with the approach that the Welsh Government are taking in terms of what they're saying about their plans for reconstruction. Saying and doing, however, are often different things, and perhaps we'll come on to that later. But I don't subscribe to the kind of build back better narrative, because that implies that what we had before was fine and we just need to do it a bit better. I subscribe more to the reconstruct narrative, which is really recognising that we were getting a lot of things wrong, where we have massive income inequality gaps, where we've got huge problems in terms of climate change and so on. So we need to do some completely different things. And I think there's an opportunity for that.
I think that's one of the things COVID's done. It's put many aspects of life under a magnifying glass. And people say like being an accelerator, particularly, for example, in the retail sector. It's not all retail that's suffering. It's the bad retail that's suffering. Retail businesses which were badly run, which weren't good retailers as such. And it's a shame that so many people have to work in those environments, because that's not a great retail place to work. So we're getting to a place now where you're looking and think there is a better way forward. And again, as you say, with the M4 relief road, there's a logic that says you need more roads, but then there's also plenty of research that says you build more roads and you'll build more congestion. And we can't ignore the fact that we have to do an awful and should want to do an awful lot to protect the climate. And where there is a narrative around, oh, but we could all have electric cars, that assumes that all electric cars are good for the environment, and they pollute as well. So I think you're quite right in that we are turning a corner. And I think actually the deeper that corner is, perhaps the better the future is going to be. And when people talk about the new normal, I think you have to question, well, actually the old normal was people just running around constantly, having no time for anything, and not necessarily, and it's just what you do, we'd all do it, but then all of a sudden there is a better way forward for everyone. So I think it is a good opportunity, to actually create a much better future for everyone. Yeah. Which sort of brings me on to your manifesto for the future, which it's a comprehensive call to action, isn't it? And I think it's got the potential to transform Wales. So how pleased are you at how it's been received?
Well, I've been really pleased that quite a number of the issues in there, or the areas that we want political parties to make commitments on, are being received really positively by the political parties. But not just the political parties, I think, wider groups within society. So we've worked very closely with, the Wildlife Trust and WWF and environmental organisations to craft some of the recommendations around the environment. We've worked with the housing sector, so we're on the same page there, recommending that there should be a human right, a right to housing. Housing should be a fundamental human right, and indeed, the housing minister was, speaking just this week and saying that, she supports that approach too. We're seeing that, we're recommending there should be a fundamental shift in terms of modes of transport and a target around modal shift. Well, just 2 weeks ago, the government released their new national transport strategy, which puts reducing the need to travel right at the top of the priority list, then active travel, then public transport, and the kind of private diesel vehicle right at the bottom. So we're already starting to see some of these ideas picked up. And, I think that gives us, some optimism. There are some of the more, really kind of, progressive things, which we thought, perhaps this time last year, in my mind, I might have been thinking this, may not be a thing for this next term. I'm going to put it out there to push the boat out, but it may not be a thing for the next term. But like the universal basic income, which, Swansea Council just this week noticed a motion from their ruling group on having a universal basic income. Council leader in Cardiff doing something very similar. We're seeing again the council in Cardiff move to a 4-day working week for refuge collectors. And one of the things that I'm advocating in my manifesto for the future is perhaps thinking about this reduced working week and what would that mean to people's well-being and so on. So I think it has been well received. I think people are crying out for a kind of progressive agenda. I think, politics in Wales perhaps has become a little bit stale. And I think that there is a need for something which, really sets out, in line with the Future Generations Act, what is that Wales that we aspire to, in the next 10, 20 years.
And I think we're also seeing a more confident Welsh government. And maybe that's in part been due to the responses they've had to make around COVID. And even though we don't have full power, with the devolved powers, there's an awful lot you can do. And it's going to be very interesting and I think right to see more inventive, creative and better thought out ways of doing things to help everybody, to be honest with you. I think the solutions are there, but they're not going to come from what we've done before. We have to look forward and hope that we can build that new future in that respect, because it's for everyone's benefit, which of course leads me on to the sort of next question. In terms of the business environment, Wales has got many, many small businesses. So I suppose they'd be wondering how, if you like, the manifesto, if implemented or even parts of it implemented, how does that benefit to the small business community? Will it help them to thrive more?
I think there are a number of elements within that manifesto which would be, really supportive of, the progress that small businesses could and should be making. So things like a focus on the foundational economy. So how do we really support, and that's, a kind of, a newish term, I suppose, which, you hear these terms bandied around and half the time people don't actually know what they are or have a slightly different perspective on what they are. To me, the foundational economy is, how can we look at the really important, services in communities? So that could be your local hairdressers, your coffee shops, your social care services, your, what your housing association is doing and so on, and see those as really important kind of economic drivers of an area. And I think the tendency in the past has been perhaps for us to focus on big, attracting big inward investment into Wales and perhaps forgetting those foundational kind of services and that foundational economy. So, recommendations around focusing much more on that. Thinking about the way that we spend the public pounds. So we spend about £7 billion in Wales through our public services, procuring goods and services. And that's anything from, office-based services to, social care services and so on. And the way in which we spend that is really important, because we can spend that in a way which gives money to, international companies or companies at the other side of the UK who don't pay their workers particularly well, where we haven't thought about the carbon emissions they might be generating, or we can use that money to spend with, local businesses who are part of that foundational economy, who are going to be employing staff locally, who are then going to be putting the money back into the economy, and so on. And then if I take that a bit broader, again, some of the recommendations that I've made around skills for the future. So I have some real concerns that the way in which we educate our children and young people, particularly the way in which we test them and assess them, is not driving us towards helping them to develop the skills that they need for the future. Now, the Federation of Small Businesses and the CBI have said for many years that young people are coming out of school without the skills that they need to go into the jobs that they've got available and so on. And I think that's because we're teaching to the test. I think we're focusing more on regurgitation of knowledge rather than skills. And when we think about, what those skills for the future are going to be, all of the international evidence says it's going to be around cooperation, collaboration, teamwork, emotional intelligence. Can you actually have an engaging conversation with someone? It's those sorts of things. And so the reforms that I'm proposing to first the examination system, so a complete rethink of GCSEs, and interestingly another COVID element coming in there. Obviously no GCSEs last year, no GCSEs this year. Is that a moment in time for us to say let's have a look at the whole thing for the future. But also then something that I'm proposing around a national mission for education, which actually came from discussion with the business community. One particular discussion in the west of Wales, actually, around, how can we as businesses actually help to develop those skills in school? How can we become part of this Wales-wide mission to help kids, work together in teams, to engage with customers, and all of those different things that that businesses need. So I'm proposing that there should be a national levy to fund that sort of programme, the potential of tax breaks for employers and businesses who might want to engage in helping to deliver the new curriculum and helping to upskill children, young people, and so on. So I think, I could go on a number of fronts about other recommendations, which I think would benefit businesses, but for me, those are the key ones.
I think with education, that's really interesting, because you want children to leave school really hungry for their future and excited about it. And as you say, you might not even know what job you want, but if you've got that mindset, if you've got those core skills as a person, you're going to find the right thing, but you're also going to be hungry for it, and employers will see that. And I like the idea of bringing more employers into the classrooms, because at the very least that's going to provide a lot of inspiration for young people to think, oh, I could be that, and there's so many different things out there that you haven't got a clue about, have you? So I think that's really good, could be really uplifting for young people, because I think it's having that sense of being a well-educated person, a questioning mind, and with that self-confidence. If you leave school with those things, then the world is literally your oyster, and you can retrain, you can do whatever you don't come out of school trained anyway, do you, for a particular career? But if you come out with the right mindset, the right attitude, the right outlook, then it's all there waiting for you. And I think that would be a phenomenal achievement. I think we'd all be really proud of kids that were that hungry. They would ask an awful lot of awkward questions to everybody as well, which I think they've every right to, and I'd quite like that as well. It makes life harder for all of us, but children that do question and question intelligently, that would be fantastic to see.
Absolutely.
Of course, we talk about all the big changes, and at the same time I'm quite convinced that lots of small changes make a big difference. And so I just wondered, in your own thinking, if there were perhaps 3 things that we could all do quite easily, lots of these small changes that themselves could make a big difference for Wales.
Mm-hmm. Small changes in your own life. I suppose top of my list would be walking or cycling, or rollerblading or scooting, or whatever floats your boat that isn't a car, wherever you possibly can. That helps us to reduce our emissions. When you're walking and cycling, and I often reflect back to remember that the big snow we had a couple of years ago, when there were no cars on the street, people were having to walk everywhere, and so on, and they were stopping, the social interactions, the fact that you notice that you might not have seen your neighbour out for a few days, your elderly neighbour, and you're going to call on them, and so on and so on. So it helps to build those cohesive communities. It helps to keep us healthy. It helps to reduce air pollution, particularly around schools. So one of the things I've been really pressing the government on more recently is how we look at doing some really kind of simple things around the closure of schools, streets to traffic, which will help with social distancing, but also help with that reduction of air pollution, which is so bad for our kids. So walking, cycling, scooting, whatever, wherever you go. Sorry, I'm still on number 1. Number 2, I think, would to be thinking about the way that you make your spending decisions. So whether that's is your energy provider 100% renewable energy provider, whether that's can you embrace pre-loved fashion. I love clothes, but my absolute favorite thing is browsing charity shops, and so on. That means you're reducing the kind of environmental impact of buying new, but you're also putting money into the pockets of cancer research, or whatever charity shop you're in. So think pre-loved. And think and buy pre-loved. And then I suppose the kind of the final thing would be to think about your your choices in terms of, some really basic stuff in your, in your household. So, what sort of products you're using, are you really, can you find inventive ways to avoid food waste? That's, again, one of my favorite things. A bit of a shout out to an organization called RAP, who are focused on reducing waste. If you've got a load of random items in your fridge, they will give you some recipes of things that you can do with them rather than chuck them out. So I think there are some fairly kind of basic things there that we can all do, but we have to forget, we mustn't forget that we've got to make it easier for people as well. So there is an obligation on business in terms of reducing packaging. There is an obligation on the government to make sure public transport is accessible and, not too costly, and so on and so on.
Brilliant. And yeah, we are moving away from just doing our bit by a bit of recycling to taking that next step, isn't it? As you know, I've only put 1 tank of petrol in my car this year, and it's great.
Brilliant.
I guess then, if we get the crystal ball out, and it would be lovely just to know, this time next year, ideally, what would make you feel really happy to have seen being achieved? I mean, I know there's a lot to do, but in a year's time, what would good look like for you?
So I would like us to have our whole house building programme in Wales, one which is a carbon neutral house building programme. I would like us to be increasing year on year the amount or the proportion that we're spending on active travel and public transport to to get at least to an equal level to what we spend on roads currently. There's quite a long way to go on that. I would like us to have had a rethink about whether we should be continuing with exams in the same way that that we have done. I'd like us to be in a position where we were working, towards the sort of hyper-local. So home working is a big element of that, but how can we support local businesses to thrive? One of the things that I've suggested is, there's talk about setting up home working hubs for those people who don't have, appropriate, a room or a Wi-Fi or what have you to work at home. And so need that kind of external place to go. But actually, shouldn't we be thinking about, could we support the local coffee shop to deliver a home working hub, during the day when they're sort of quieter? Why would we be thinking about setting up a government-based one when actually we could have a double whammy of giving them some funding to do that, and so on? So I think that I'd like to see some innovative solutions which aim to have multiple wins coming from the government and others. Let's not forget that, actually it's usually other people that come up with the best ideas. The government just need to listen to them and getting those implemented.
Thank you so very much. And I think it's encouraging that there is actually so much activity at the moment, and the pace for change seems to be there as well. And so I can only truly hope that as we go into 2021, no matter what challenges we're going to face, this more positive path, I think for a small nation such as Wales, could offer massive rewards. And Sophie, thank you so very much for joining us today. There is an accompanying article to this video, which you can watch at, or read rather, at businessnewswales.com. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you very much.